There are 5 massive differences between the core model PRS Silver Sky and the SE Silver Sky, and we're going through those today. Difference number 1 is the neck. If you've picked up either one of these guitars or both of them in rapid succession, you will immediately notice that the neck feels much more substantial in your hand on the core model versus the SE Silver Sky. Now, I have the rosewood version on the core and the maple version on the SE, but I would venture to tell you that it's kind of the same across the board. Even if you're comparing apples to apples, the feel is going to be different. Whether or not you think it's bigger, smaller, whatever they say on the website that the carve is, they're different. They're very different, and it's to the point where if you close your eyes, it almost feels like a different guitar. Now, what doesn't help this is the difference in finishes. So the rosewood version on the core has a slightly glossier finish than the maple versions do, especially the SE Silver Sky. That doesn't help with a direct comparison, but if you can get beyond the differences in finishes, in sanding, and just wood in general, the shape of the neck itself is different. And you can actually see it too when you look down from a playing position. You can see that there's just a different shape to how they've constructed both necks. The second biggest difference is going to be fret size. At least on my core model 2020 version, which I have here, the frets are considerably smaller than the frets that are on the SE Silver Sky. That is not necessarily a good or bad thing. It just might be a personal taste thing. So if you're looking at these two guitars, and obviously they're two completely different price ranges, that's another big difference we're not talking about, but if you happen to be looking at the two of them and trying to decide between the two, make sure you pick up both of them because the fret size is different and it does provide for a different playing experience. You can see the difference, but also when you start playing, you can definitely feel the difference as well. So the third difference is going to be centered around how the nut is seated and constructed on the guitar. If you look at the core model, you've got a traditional kind of old style Fender nut. If you look at the SE, it's a much larger nut that's at the end of the fretboard. Just two different construction styles. I will tell you though, it's a lot easier to replace and construct a nut like the SE Silver Sky has. So obviously, to get it at that price point, they've made some decisions. I'm not gonna say they cut corners because I don't know that one is really better than the other, but there have definitely been some decisions made, and the nut and the style of nut that they use is one of them. It changes the aesthetics too. It just looks different. When you look at that versus this, it's different. So the fourth difference is going to be the hardware. Now the hardware on both of these is somewhat similar, but there are some differences. You get locking tuners on the core model. You get a 6-point tremolo system on the core model. On the SE, you do not get locking tuners and you have a 2-point tremolo system. Now, how much does that really matter? I don't know. I find that both of these guitars stay in tune really well. Both trem systems work just fine as you would expect them to work. So I don't know that there's really that big of a difference there. Personally, I love changing strings on these locking tuners. The PRS locking tuners with the knobs on the top are the easiest and I think best version of a locking tuner that there is out there. I just like them. Now, you can get into the argument as to whether or not they change the sound of the guitar. I personally don't think that they do. And if they do, I would rather have the ease and tuning stability that these provide versus the standard old style tuners. But again, there's nothing wrong with those on the SE. And if I'm not mistaken, I do believe there are some aftermarket mods out there so we can get locking tuners on the SE model if it's something you really need or want. Now, the biggest and most important difference between these two guitars comes down to the pickups and the sound, and there's no better way for me to demonstrate that than by just letting you hear them. So I don't know if you can tell the difference between these two guitars, but the SE Silver Sky has a completely different character when it comes to the pickups, the output, and just the overall tone of the guitar. It's much more aggressive, it's hotter, it's got more bite, and it's very different than the core model. In fact, I will tell you, the first time I played one of these SE Silver Skies, I actually liked the output and the sound better on these pickups than those. However, you have to remember, there is something called loudness bias. So when you hear something that's louder, more powerful, you kind of just subconsciously almost feel like it's better. I don't think that's the case. I don't think this is better. I don't think that's worse, or vice versa. I think they're just very different. And they're actually kind of like shockingly different to me. I've said this before in previous videos. For two guitars that are modeled after one another, or this one's modeled after that one, I'm actually surprised that they went with the tonal characteristics that they did on this guitar. It is very different than the core model. Again, not bad, but different. So two guitars, one inspired by the other, one a cheaper version of the other, but they are different enough to where I think that you need to pay attention to those differences when you make your decision on buying one versus the other. Yes, one is in a totally different price range, and you may not be able to consider something in the core lineup. Maybe you can go used though, and then you start to close that gap a little bit more between the SE and the core model. So I'm gonna link both of the guitars in the description below. If you happen to pick one up through one of those links, I sincerely appreciate it because it does support this channel, and I will see you in the next one.